Hey guys, welcome back. Great to have you here today. Today we're going to go super sciencey. So this is not my typical video. Usually when I do videos, I'm talking about more player specific things. So how to be able to improve your swing right away, how to get better technique, and to hit the ball more solid. Now this information that I'm going to talk about today is going to be some of the most important information that I've seen. There's some great PhD biomechanists out there that are really bringing a lot of this to light. One of the guys at the forefront with what I'm going to be talking about today is Sasha McKenzie. I've learned a ton through watching his videos and attended an in-person conference with him and Phil Cheatham with the Forces in Motion workshop. But I really enjoyed learning this information. I think it's so important to understanding what's going on in the golf swing. So if you're just kind of a golf geek like me, you like to know a little bit about everything golf related, this could be a great video for you. But I am going to get pretty deep into the science here. And I apologize if I get anything wrong. So if any of you PhD biomechanists out there see something that I may have misstated, let me know and I'll be sure to clarify that. So we're going to talk about what is it that really makes this golf club move. So let's imagine I wanted to hit a draw. Where are the forces going that are allowing this club to swing more out to the right and for the face to rotate on open? Let's imagine that I'm going to hit a fade and I'm coming more this way and the face is opening up. You know, all these different things in golf, what causes the club to accelerate with a lot of speed? I mean, how come somebody 130 pounds can rip a driver? I mean, how should that even be possible and outdrive a guy that's 250 pounds? You know, what goes into that? And we're going to be talking about the actual forces that are going just into the golf club. So that's one of the first things I wanted to clarify. You know, we talk a lot about body motions and body movements. So one of the things is, you know, getting a big power turn is one of the things we talk about in the top speed golf system. I get that big power turn. I'm really loading up my hips, loading up my shoulders, getting wound up. PGA Tour players on average are getting almost 120 degrees of shoulder turn as they're going back. Well, if I don't translate that energy into the handle of the club, it makes absolutely no difference. So if I make this big, huge power turn and then I just gradually let the club fall down, I don't put any more energy into the handle here, my club head is not going to go any faster. If I'm coming, you know, whatever it is with my body, let's say that we're talking about in the hips opening up in the downswing, if that energy from my hips doesn't work its way into the golf club, it doesn't make any difference. Or my elbow, you know, a lot of people are working on different elbow positions, different plane positions. All that has to wind up into the handle or it's not going to affect your golf shot at all. So the only thing that affects what this club face does, and more specifically the center of mass, what we'll talk about here in a second, is the forces that I'm putting into the handle. So keep that in mind when we're talking about anything golf related. Any golf instruction that you read out there, that you hear out there, that is an effort to change the way that I'm putting force into the handle. So that's a good foundation for what we're going to be talking about. Now the center of mass in a golf club is basically the balancing point. So if you took up, you know, there's a lot of metal out here in the head. There's a lot more metal going down in the shaft. The shaft is fairly light, the head is fairly heavy. So if I balance this club on my finger, you can see that I have a little piece of tape that I wrapped around the club shaft there. That's kind of representing the center of mass, or it's not exactly the center of mass, but close to it. Then I should be able to balance this from any direction. Now since my handle comes down in the hosel, and the most of the mass of the club is out here, the center of mass is actually floating out here in the middle of space somewhere. So my finger should be bouncing just off the shaft. If I had a little piece of something to grab on there, I could turn this club in any direction and it would be completely balanced no matter which way I turn it on that center of mass. So the center of mass isn't actually inside the club, just kind of a side note there. If I was to bend this club like this, I'll try not to break my iron. If I was to bend that club like that, I would be moving the center mass farther off the shaft. If I was to throw a 5-pound weight back here, I would be moving that center mass from down here to way up here somewhere. So this is moving, the center mass of the club is constant for the club, but depending on if I put some lead tape, if I made the shaft longer, if I made the shaft shorter, that changes it a little bit. So that's just a side note, not all that important for what we're going to be talking about today. But let's just visualize for the sake of this video that that piece of tape is the perfect center of mass, and that's where we're going to be swinging this club. Now, anything that moves this club is a force acting on this center of mass. So if there's nothing acting on the center of mass, there's nothing that's going to move it. So for example, if I'm perfectly balanced here, I have gravity hitting down at the top of this club, pulling the club toward the ground. If I was to move my finger right now is pushing back up with the exact same amount that gravity is pushing down. Those are canceling out. That's why this club isn't moving. If I move my finger, gravity gets that club to drop straight down toward the ground. An interesting side note, and I think this was some great information that Sasha McKenzie kind of pointed out, is that whenever I have gravity, if that's working perfectly through the center of mass, it's not going to one side of the center mass or the other side, gravity is kind of uniform, this club isn't going to rotate as it falls, right? So if I drop that handle down, the club just drops down straight down to the ground. When we get any kind of rotation of this golf club, like we have in a golf swing, a lot of rotation, we're putting a force that's not working through the center of this center of mass. So it's a force that's at an angle of that. A good way to envision that would be, let's imagine that I put a little extra force toward the head side, well, I'm going to get rotation that way. If I put a little extra force, here's the center mass, I'm going to put it on this side of it, I'm going to get rotation the other way. So that's all kind of important to realize, is that all the rotation happens, all the acceleration, the movement of the golf club in the swing is going to happen when that force is acting not through the center mass. I could pull straight through the center mass. So let's imagine that I have this club laying on the ground. We're going to forget about friction with the ground. We're going to forget about gravity, all that stuff for now. But let's imagine that I have this center mass right here, and I'm going to pull my club kind of parallel with this orange stick. Well, that's just going to track right along in a straight line. I could push as long as I'm lined up perfectly with that center mass. Tough to do when you're pushing because you constantly have to kind of be adjusting. Then it would move in a straight line that way. Same thing if I pull, gravity's going down, I'm going to pull directly vertically. We don't get any kind of rotation. If I started to pull to one side or pull to another side, now all of a sudden you're going to start to get some rotation and some movement. In the golf swing, hardly ever, you could probably say basically never, maybe for a brief split second here and there, you're always pulling in a different direction that's not directly through the center mass. So let's kind of go along with that same idea here, and let's talk about the net force. So the net force, like I mentioned earlier, the only way that I'm moving this club in a golf swing, doesn't matter what my knees are doing, doesn't matter what my hips are doing, all that matters is what direction am I putting force into this handle. That's what moves the club. If I took all these forces, so you have forces in your index finger, your pinky, your thumb, your palm of your hand, all those forces, if you combine those together, then that would result in one net force. So let's say the net force is directly that way, well then I would be putting force into it that way, this center of mass would react to that. So if you combine all these forces together, you can kind of spit that out as one direct arrow saying it's moving this way. And that is the only thing that changes the movement of the club. Whatever you're doing has to go through the handle, and then you could take a midpoint. So if you took a point between your left hand and your right hand, kind of found the middle of that, if you said the net force, we're going to assume it's coming out of that way for a lot of the biomechanist software out there. We're going to assume that's the net force going in a certain direction. Then we could boil that down and say that's the only thing that's moving this club. So there is some gravity, there is some friction between the air, that kind of thing. That's small amounts. In the golf swing, that really doesn't amount to a lot. So we're going to kind of say that that's the main force that's going to be in there. So to my knowledge, the only person that I've seen that has kind of a accumulated net force is Sasho McKenzie. He has some great videos out there. You can find some of those on Vimeo, where he shows like a 3D model of this happening for those of you who want to learn a little bit more about it. So it's pretty interesting stuff. So given that net force is going through the handle and this center mass is going to react to that, let's talk about how that's going to make sense in a golf swing. So in the last example, I talked about how if I had my net force, or the accumulation of all those forces was going directly this way, that center mass will just track right along in a straight line. Now, if my center mass all of a sudden gets outside of that, so let's say now my center mass is on this side, and I'm going to pull that exact same direction. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my club down that orange stick, that direction this way. You're going to notice how that center of mass wants to kick in and start to line up with that. You'll also notice as I do this, it's not a direct motion over here. A lot of times people think about that when they're looking at what's called the moment. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But whenever I pull this club downward, that center of mass wants to start to track in and move closer to the line that I'm putting the force in, the line of the net force. So if you could imagine, I'm pulling in that direction toward my orange stick here. This would be the line that I'm pulling. So you take that net force and you say it's going this way. An extension of that line would be what's called the line of action. So if I had that line extended out here, this is my net force, I'm going this direction, there's your line of action. That center of mass is going to want to translate, kind of kick in toward this line of action. So it wants to work this way toward that line. The harder I pull, the more it wants to kick out there. And even in extreme cases, if I pull really hard, it may even whip past that because of its momentum and then come back to it again. But eventually it's gonna line up perfectly with that as long as I keep pulling in the same direction. So, okay, Clay, I get it, there's some science involved. Why the heck would I even care? Well, don't worry, I'm getting there. I'm gonna talk about how this relates to a swing. If I turned it the other way though, this is where the over-the-top moves come in. This is where slicing, where a lot of things come in the golf swing. If I was to do that exact same motion, pull this way, now that center mass, since it started over here on this side of the line of action, as I pull down, it's gonna translate in the opposite direction. So whether I was over here pulling down, whether I was over there pulling down, either way, it was trying to work toward the direction that I was pulling, or toward that net force, that line of action, you could call it. So that's the only thing that's moving the club in the golf swing. When we start talking about it here in a minute, we'll talk about how that's also going to want it to close the face when that's off of the line of the center mass. So it's important to know that when that, let's imagine let's give you a good example of a golf swing now. Let's put this to actual action here instead of just talking, you know, kind of random ideas. So when my golf swing, I think the visual that most people have, and the visual that I had wrongly for a long time, is that you have kind of a swing plane here. And when I make this swing, I'm gonna have my hands and my club track perfectly down that swing plane. I'm putting force, you know, kind of like the Ben Hogan plane of glass, kind of imagine that. I'm gonna put force down that swing plane, that plane of glass. This club's gonna track perfectly down that plane of glass, and I'm gonna be the most consistent golfer in the world. That's kind of what I had envisioned. That's not the way it works. If you look at pro players, another great piece of information I picked up from watching one of Sasha's videos was, if you take all the major winners, I think he said he took about 20 major champions that he had 3D data for, as they started their transition, an early transition, so as soon as those hands started down, if you took the direction the hands were moving, every single one of them had that center mass below the direction the hands were moving. So they were laying that center mass off, or that net force isn't exactly the same as where the hands are moving, but let's kind of pretend it is for this video. Not exactly right from science. My hands are moving this way. That club was flatter than that. And because of that, now you have this line of action again. That's going to want it to kick down and catch up with those hands. So all the pro major winners to pro players, all but one, would have that club shallower than that in early downswing and kicking forward to help that club kick forward. Now, not only is it going to kick forward, it's also going to help to turn this face and release the face when it's going that way. So very important. That's why you see so many high handicap golfers shallow that club out. In the top speed golf system, that's exactly what we teach with the move. So when we do the move, we're shallowing this club out to get that relationship and to get that club starting to kick forward. If you took high handicap players, and what he mentioned in his video was that high handicap players, the club shaft is steeper than that. So let's go to the top again. Let's say we're over the top, and now my hand path is the same direction, but the center mass is on the other side. Well, what's gonna happen is I pull down this direction, that club's gonna fall in, it's gonna get stuck under very late, my face is working open, I'm coming down kind of over top of the ball, and I'm gonna result in that big slice. So for those of you that are out there struggling with your slice, a great way to check and see what's happening with this. So this isn't exactly 100% science, this is more kind of everyday usable type stuff that we could do. If you videotape your swing from down the line, if I was to go to the top of the swing and I was to take a line on my hands and I want to trace down where my hand's moving the first couple of, first foot or so in the downswing, draw a red line on that. And then I'll go ahead and use a demo swing here in a second. We'll draw that red line on there. I want to get the center mass of my club out here. I want to get it below that line. And if I do that, now I'm going to have that club wanting to kick forward and release. So the club's actually wanting to accelerate toward the target and to get a lot more speed. So now, not only is the face wanting to turn over to help me get a draw, it's going to also be kicking and accelerating the club forward due to that moment. So again, the moment, I don't know if I explained that quite clear enough in the last one, but if I had, this is my net force. So here's the handle, there's the midpoint of the hands. I'm gonna drag this club, right there down this orange line. The moment is the force that's wanting this center mass to kick towards the line of action, which is this direction that I'm pulling, an extension of the direction I'm pulling. And you'll see that start to trace along with that. So the more force I put into there, the bigger the moment and the bigger the amount of pull toward this line. You'll notice it doesn't go like this though. That was a mistake that I made in my own mind when I was very first learning this. I thought that the center of mass would want to kick directly over here toward that line of action. You'll see how it moves down and toward that. It's happening over a period of time. The more force I put in there, or the harder I put force in, the harder that's going to want to kick, the more momentum it's going to kick. So as I put more force in the golf swing, that's going to have more momentum working it forward. Now, the last thing I want to kind of end here with is that your club, as I mentioned before, the force you're putting into this handle is almost never lined up, in a golf swing at least, almost never lined up perfectly with the center of mass. It's always going to one angle or another. So the crucial thing to take away from all this, in my opinion, as a golf instructor, is that I want to make sure that the timing of this is right. It's in the early transition that I have to shallow this club out. It's in the early transition that I have to get this below my hands. If I was steep coming down here, and it's very steep in this part of the swing, and then it shallows out late, that doesn't do me any good, because now all the momentum, the moment I'm pulling this way, wants that club to shallow out. Is it shallowing out? Yes, it's shallowing out a lot, but now it's got so much going in the opposite direction that I have to overcome that and change my net force a lot to make a good solid contact on the ball. So think about this as like a wave. When does a wave start and when does it end? It's not really easy to tell. It's always moving around. So the big takeaway and the most important thing that I've seen from this, as far as this is what's called out of plane movement. So if my hands are moving down, let's call it a plane. The plane is always moving, but this is always trying to kick forward. Once it catches up, it's going to tend to go the other way. And if I don't keep changing the direction my force is going, it's going to react to that. So keep that in mind. It's the early transition that we want to shallow this club, that all the pros are doing that. If you're coming down steep and then you say, oh, look, I'm shallowing it very late, well, I may be blocking that a mile to the right. I got to get this early transition. So let's go ahead and give you guys a drill now to tie this in. And we'll talk a little bit about the face on to get you kind of thinking about how else this plays in a swing. But if I was going to set up to hit a shot, and I set up my camera to where it's shooting down my feet here and toward my target in the distance. When I make a swing, I want to draw a line from the top of my swing, from the butt end of the club, and I want to trace down about the first foot or so of where my hands are moving. Go ahead and put a red line on there. I want to check to make sure in that position, so in that early transition, as soon as my hands are starting down, my club is shallower than that. And it should be shallower than that by quite a few degrees. If I'm only here, 1 or 2 degrees shallower, 5 degrees shallower, I want it to be more. I want it to be a significant amount shallower than that. And then here's the other key. As we're coming through contact, as we're starting down, let's say before contact, my club's wanting to catch up with that line. Prior to contact, I'm going to go ahead and turn my hand force back up and to the left. So my hands are going to move up and to the left. That's going to keep that moment working into the left and keep it accelerating as I'm coming through the ball. So that's a real world way of thinking, I'm going to shallow this path out, or shallow the center of mass out below my hand path. And as I come through, I'm working the club more, or working my hands, more to the left. That actually accelerates the club squarely through the ball. I'm not pulling the club to the left because my center of mass is shallower than that. So it's going to want to kick forward, kick straight through it. That's a great real world way to actually use this in the golf swing. That's why people talk about your hands going to the left. That's one of the reasons we need to open up our hips. That's one of the reasons we need our shoulder kind of raising. So as my hands move up and to the left, kind of this direction, some people call it around the corner, that's going to accelerate that club and whip it on through there. One last thing we'll talk about here today before I leave. It's kind of hot out here for this black shirt, but let's talk about when we're looking from face on. The same thing actually happens, and I'll leave you with one point that I've made in multiple other videos. Whenever a PGA Tour player, a professional golfer that's swinging, say 120 miles an hour, just prior to impact, this net force, from what we've seen from Sasho's information, is coming up this way. You're actually not pulling forward to it. If I was pulling forward, center of mass is here, there's the net force, the line would actually be behind that, and it would be wanting this club to slow down. I'm constantly keeping that net force tilting more and more back to help create that moment again and to really accelerate that club coming through contact. So it's pretty neat. I'll maybe address that in another video. But a recap here, I've definitely learned a lot from this. I want to thank Sasho McKenzie for putting this information out there. He's done quite a few videos on this. I think it's really helping us as golf instructors, and somebody, myself, I'm very interested in biomechanics, to kind of put all these pieces together and to start see the actual forces that are happening. I think this will be the instruction of the future. Do you need to know this to be a good golfer, to be a good player? You know, I don't think so. People didn't know this for hundreds of years in relationship to the golf swing and did some pretty good golf. But I think it helps. I think it helps you to understand this information, so somebody that's steep starts to get a good mental picture of why they need to shallow it out and how to accelerate that club. So pretty cool stuff. Let's go ahead and hit one here. Let's see if I can shallow out that center of mass relationship to my hands and get some good speed on one. All right guys, hope y'all really enjoyed this video. If you did, I got an awesome bonus for you. We all want lots of lag in our golf swing. It's so crucial to have tons of lag to be able to get that high club head speed and to be able to drive it past your friends. I'm gonna play a preview from one of my most important golf lag videos. If you're on a desktop device, you can go ahead and click the link that pops up on your screen. If you're on a phone or a tablet, you go ahead and click the iCard and you're gonna get instant access to that video. Plus, you're gonna get instant access to 5 videos from our Top Speed Golf system. Good luck to you guys. Go out there and rip the ball. Hi guys, and welcome back. I'm Ballard, and in today's video we're going to talk about one of the absolute worst drills for creating lag. It's a very common drill that I see, and in this drill what we're going to do is we're going to set the wrist very early to create an angle of lag, and then we're going to try to hold this throughout the swing. It's one of the worst things that you can do to build lag. I'm going to talk about the science behind why this is the case, and I'm also going to give you a great drill to help you improve your lag, all in this video. Let's go ahead and get started. If I do it this way versus holding that position, exact same thing happens when we're building the lag in the golf swing. So what we want to do is throughout the swing, I want to have a very low and wide takeaway. So I'm not going to set my wrist early at all. If you look at a lot of the top players, you look at Adam Scott, very wide takeaway, not very much wrist set at all. You look at Rory McIlroy, you look at Tiger Woods. All these players are using a wide takeaway and not getting very much wrist set, so that later in the swing, as we start down, we can increase this wrist set, and we're really only going to max out this angle of lag for a split second in the downswing. Okay, so a 3-step drill here. Now, as we get started with this, I want to remind you that the fulcrum in this golf club for getting a massive amount of lag is right at the end of the golf club. This is where I want my hinge point to be.